Now I'd like to invite to our stage our moderator for this morning's panel sessions, Spencer Chase, and the speakers for our first panel discussion on approaches for fostering equity. While Spencer and our panelists are getting settled on the stage, let me tell you about our moderator, a familiar face at our annual meetings. Spencer is an enterprising agricultural journalist and broadcaster who is the managing editor of Agri-Pulse. He serves as the host of Agri-Pulse Newsmakers, a weekly show focused on the heart of agriculture policy, and produces Agri-Pulse Drive Time, a daily podcast of key events. Spencer was the 2022 president of the National Association of Farm Broadcasting, one of the youngest broadcasters to ever have been selected. He has won awards of recognition for his work with the association, including the 2017 Horizon Award for Emerging Talent and the 2020 Doan Award for his work on the Deep Dive on Dairy podcast. NACD was pleased to be recently featured in Agri-Pulse's latest Deep Dive podcast series titled 5 Farm and Food Policy Drivers. Our president and CEO are featured in episode 5 that launched on January 9th, exploring Dust in the Wind, American Agriculture's Conservation. Thanks for this platform to share your collective voice of conservation, Spencer. And over to you to begin our panel discussion. Spencer.
Well, thank you very much, Bill. Appreciate the kind introduction. Appreciate all of you for having me again here this year. It's always a great time to spend time with the folks at NACD, and looking forward to a discussion with the folks that we've got up here on stage as well. I'm going to be pretty brief and try and make myself as scarce as possible because I know, frankly, you all did not come here to listen to me. You'd rather hear from the folks that know what the heck they're talking about. So with that in mind, I am going to just briefly introduce our panelists here, basically by way of name and title. If you're looking for more in-depth introductions and more in-depth biographies of the folks that we have here on stage, those can be found on the agenda on the NACD website for this event. So starting off directly to my left, to your the right of the stage, we have Dr. Dewayne Goldmon, the Senior Advisor for Racial Justice and Equity at the Department of Agriculture. Next to Dr. Goldmon, we have Jeanette Lombardo, the Executive Director of the Farmer Veteran Coalition. Next to Jeanette, Seanicaa Edwards Herron, the Founder and Executive Director of the Freedom Heirs Foundation. Then we have Gary Matteson, the Senior Vice President for Beginning Farmer Programs and Outreach at the Farm Credit Council. And last but certainly not least, we have Nancy Wahl-Scheurich, the Executive Director of the California Association of Resource Conservation Districts. Please join me in thanking our panelists for taking time to be with us. Title of the panel, Approaches for Fostering Equity. And equity is a conversation that we didn't hear a lot of up until a few years ago, I feel like, as someone that's been covering the industry for about a decade now. It's a conversation that has certainly heightened in recent weeks, recent years. And I do wonder, to really advance the concept of equity, I think we need to first identify what is standing in the way of preventing us from achieving that level of equity that we all so desire. So I'll start with you on that, Dr. Goldmon. From your perspective at the Department of Agriculture, what are the obstacles in the way when we think about advancing equity, achieving conservation practices on the ground?
Thanks, Spencer. And let me just back up and think about where I am. This is not my first time at NACD. In fact, it's good to be back. But as conservationists, as farmers, ranchers, landowners, I would challenge you, as we're talking about equity, to think about your first time. Now, I'm gonna keep it clean, but the first time you, let's say you planted a seed and come back 4 or 5 days later, and the excitement around watching that seed germinate, or birthing a calf, or driving a tractor, riding a horse, doing all those things that we do on the farm. And think about your first positive experience with NRCS or a conservation program. And then think about people who've never had that opportunity, that for one reason or another, Spencer, they never were able to pull it all together, to work through the paperwork, to get past the person in the county or in the office who is reluctant to get them to yes. Think about the first time unfortunately, as we're talking about equity, we have a large number of people who've never gotten to yes when it comes to being able to go through and do the paperwork, do what's required to get that first conservation contract. And as I think about our agricultural system today, the population growth, the fact that we have to develop a system that allows everyone to participate at their optimum level, I think about equity, and I think about those people, those underserved farmers and ranchers out there, that we have to get to yes on conservation benefits. And I know we'll talk a little later about some of the things that are obstacles in the way, but we do have obstacles. I came into this department 3 years ago, first ever senior advisor for racial justice and equity. But as I travel around the country and hear the stories, a couple of things come to mind. One, we have been able to get some people to yes, and it's probably due to a lot of the efforts from the people in this room. But unfortunately, we still have a large number of people who we need to work with to get to yes, and that's where the equity comes into play.
Jeanette, curious your thoughts on the obstacles that stand in the way to achieving equity from the perspective of someone working so closely with the nation's veterans.
Yeah, with the Farmer Veteran Coalition, we work, if you're not familiar with us, transitioning those veterans from military service into either beginning farmer and rancher or working in the agricultural sector as a career. I think that most of them are beginning farmers and ranchers. Some of them may have come from rural backgrounds, and some have never done it before, truly a beginner. The normal barriers to entry that we see in agriculture are what they face. So capital access, land access, technical assistance, and really just trying to figure out how to maneuver the system. There's 29 agencies in the USDA, and they need a lot of them to be successful. So really helping them with that and helping them market their product. So any way we can help them overcome those barriers, that's what we do.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Seanicaa, you and I were talking before the panel about not only your current role with the Freedom Heirs Foundation, but also prior roles at the Department of Agriculture. What have those experiences taught you about the barriers to equity that exist here today?
That's a great question, and thank you, Spencer, for bringing that up. I actually have a unique perspective now that I'm in the nonprofit space, working directly with farmers, but also working in the government space and the private sector space. Now, working directly with farmers now, as Dr. Goldmon and Ms. Jeanette just stated, the underlying stories are all the same. Access to technical assistance, access to land, access to market opportunities. But I have identified what I call two invisible barriers. Number one being access to information, accurate and timely information, and then access to the proper relationships. So when I say relationships, I'm meaning folks at different departments within state USDA, Departments of Agriculture. Also NRCS, USDA, making sure that the producers know whom they can call when they need to get answers, specifically while it's regarding conservation.
Very good. Let's take a financial look at things here, Gary. What does Farm Credit see as some of the barriers that are existing?
Well, it's interesting, Spencer. You can see in my title, it's beginning farmers, and that's part of the mission of Farm Credit. We're charged by Congress to serve the needs of young beginning small farmers, and by helping our Farm Credit associations, our direct lenders understand that our mission also includes, in that same statement from Congress, serving the needs of all of agriculture. We do put credit-worthy in there. I got to tell you, you got to pay the loan back. But the idea that incorporating equity and a sense of serving all of agriculture into all of us who serve the needs of beginning farmers, underserved farmers, making that a mission sense that's absorbed by everybody is really the way to make change happen, and what we've tried to do within Farm Credit.
Very good. And Nancy, wrapping up this, the kind of initial thought with you, what are in your role some of the barriers that you identify in the pursuit of equity?
Well, everyone's already talked about just generally a lack of access to the great programs that are out there. And this is not because there aren't great programs, it's just that people aren't finding them accessible. And I think the major barriers, at least in California, are language barriers, historically low outreach by agencies, time, and just in general accessibility. So let me go into that a little bit more. California has the second highest percentage of Spanish-speaking farmers in the country, just after Texas, and the second highest percentage of Asian farmers just after Hawaii. And definitely for these folks, language barriers are probably the biggest problem. And that manifests in what are you going to do with informational materials that are only in English if that's not your first language. There might be outreach from agencies who would like to help, but they can't because they don't speak your language, or they're reticent to reach out because there might be these communication problems. And then just also the problem of maybe not being tuned into or maybe welcomed into, informal networks in the farming community where folks can kind of support each other. Another statistic, and I think a lot of you are aware of this, is that about 60% of farmers of color operate on 50 acres or less, and 30% of them operate on farms that are 10 acres or less. So we can assume that in a large number of these situations, these are family farms where everybody in the family is working hard all day long on the land. So, so even if language isn't a problem, time is. So, you're working all day long hard. How do you take a whole day off of work that means your livelihood to go to a meeting that happens in the middle of the day where you might get information that you need about these sources of funding? And do you have hours after work to spend poring over grant documents that are hard to understand, if you are an English speaker and, went to college? So, so those are the biggest problems that we see on the actual farmer level.
So we've identified the problems, we've identified the barriers and obstacles toward achieving equity. Let's talk about how we get around them and talk about how not only we can overcome them, but how folks already have. And curious the perspectives that all of you will bring to that. And we'll start with you on this one, Dr. Goldmon. What you see at the Department of Agriculture in terms of how folks are overcoming some of these equitable barriers that are in front of them.
Yeah, great question, Spencer. I have to at least acknowledge that when we find ourselves, our customers with disparities, when we find inequities, there's another consequence that comes from that, and that is the loss of hope sometimes, a distrust in the department. And so we find ourselves operating kind of what we call kind of a trust deficit. So we really have to depend on people like NACD that will help us bridge that trust barrier so that they have better knowledge of these programs and the people and can make the connections as to how this works. And that's a critical part of it. The other parts of it, though, also include addressing a lot of the barriers that have been described here, really finding creative ways to address some of the barriers to capital and access. And a lot of that comes from giving people that first opportunity to really get to yes, get a successful program, and understand that these programs are designed to work for them. And there is another piece. Interestingly, I was with a group, and I'll just ask in this crowd, how many of you have heard of Heirs property? I'm going there, Gary. I know you know. So I'm guessing, I'm pretty decent at math. I'm going to say maybe 5-10% of the crowd has heard it. It's about 800 people in here. Well, heirs property is a problem, particularly in the black farming community, because people don't trust the system, right? It's a problem in Native American lands. It's called fractionated lands, and so it doesn't give the landowner clear access to title. And as you all know, if you don't have clear access to title, you're forbidden from signing up for certain NRCS programs. Well, if you're trying to get conservation initiatives on the ground and you're serious about addressing disparities, we have to address heirs property. So that's kind of a two-way approach. One approach is looking within the department to see how can rules and regulations be written so that the ownership requirements more reasonably aligned with the benefits that are associated with that. The other one, though, is working with community-based organizations, educational institutions, to heighten the awareness of heirs property issues and how families themselves can access resources to resolve them, with the goal being to create opportunities to get more conservation initiatives on the ground to address those disparities that are out there. And so that's just one example of how partnerships have to be formed in order to address these barriers. It looks a little different. We have to find solutions that are appropriate for the crowd and for the demographic that we're trying to serve.
Mm-hmm. Jeanette, what has attributed to the success that the Farmer Veteran Coalition has achieved in working to achieve equity?
I'd have to say, first of all, it would be structure. And let me explain this. So we've taken the United States and divided it into 10 regions. And those regions correspond with the USDA production model. Within those regions, we have people that have the same issues. So they're growing the same crops. They'll have the same disease pressures. They'll have the same trade issues, natural disasters. And we've gotten them working together. So sort of with this partnership. Then we've started building chapters within those states. Many of the folks here, they have FVC chapters in their states. At that level, the veterans are working together. They're sharing land. They're sharing equipment. They're helping each other figure out the VA and the USDA resources in the area to help them succeed. We're now starting to get regional coordinators through agreements and partnerships we have with NRCS, which I'll address later. But this enables us to have our chapters, executive team, advisory council, really work one-on-one, and they have the camaraderie that they're really missing from the military that helps them be successful. But they're really working on, figuring out their plan. We help them do technical assistance to help them figure out their business plan. From that, they can figure out what programs or products that they need to get from the NRCS. If they're eligible for those products, we help them complete the applications. We help do case management and walk them through that to the end. And if it comes up with an answer they don't like, we can help them through mediation or the review process. So we're with them every step of the way, both nationally and at the state level.
Mm-hmm. Seanicaa, we heard Dr. Goldmon touch on the heir property issue, and I imagine that's been a big issue for you at the Freedom Heirs Foundation, hence the name. But what are some of the things that you've seen lead to success and lead to getting conservation on the ground?
I would say building what I would term knowledge trust, meaning a engaging conversation with the more experienced farmers in a community, with the younger farmers, but also with some partners, USDA, all other agricultural organizations has been quite helpful. And then taking the approach of looking at technical assistance or reimagining it. So not the traditional way, but focusing on the fact that you actually need multimodal forms of engaging. Because right now we have 3 different generations that are within the farming community. The more experienced, as I would say, the millennials that are in their mid to late 40s, and then the younger generation. So they all look to experience conservation or the information in a different way. So very targeted approaches to how we interact with one group over another has helped to be quite successful. But when we come together in a knowledge trust, they're able to be more open, there's more engaging conversation, and there's a higher probability that you'll see continued and sustainable trust and success going forward.
What does sustainable trust, sticking with you here, Seanicaa, what does sustainable trust enable you all to accomplish, enable a producer to accomplish? We heard Dr. Goldmon talk too about sort of that lack of trust in the system. When that trust is built up, what then is possible?
When the trust is built up, then you have a environment where one can continue to move forward in a positive direction, which means increased profitability, increased sustainability, open access to markets, open access to information. When I feel that I'm in an environment where I can trust the provider that's giving me information, as Dr. Goldmon talked about earlier, in past times, there have been instances where certain communities, specifically Black communities, may not get the best information. However, if I'm in a state where I feel like I'm getting great information and the best information, then I can go forward, implement that, and then the bottom line is I'm an ag economist by training. So I'm looking to receive some economic profitability from that. All farmers want that.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's keep talking about economic profitability, Gary, because at a certain point, this stuff has to pencil out. And it needs to make financial sense for the producer, for the government, for the conservationist, for the conservation district, what have you. How have your efforts and Farm Credit's efforts worked toward equity and seen success in this regard?
I think the overriding thing to think about as we all try to work together on this, Spencer, is helping people set expectations. And we talk about technical assistance, and that's a lot of the how, right? How are you going to do this thing, this practice, plant carrots, whatever it is that you're learning how to do. That's not all of it. There's also setting the expectations. Let me use a different example, getting to financial stuff. So you in the rare instance, and I'm accusing you all now, in the rare instance where you actually incorporate financial skills into the programmatic approaches that you're doing, I think that's a deficiency. Let's work on that. In the rare instances where that happens, then you're telling that individual, so here's how you apply for a loan, let's say, to go do the thing you want to do. The next step, the setting expectations, is what's it like to sit down with a loan officer? What's it like in that room? Who's going to be asking you questions? Can you come along with me and help me?
I can.
Right? And that's okay. For a lender, that's like golden. To have somebody else come along, whether it's a language deficiency or a skills deficiency, to have somebody with that applicant to be able to say, yeah, this is what we've talked about, and obviously ahead of time, set expectations for what you're expecting to happen in that meeting so you can find some better success. Because in the end, the expectation of the individual has to be, I refer to it as informed consent, like you do at a hospital, right? Before you have surgery, you have to sign a piece of paper that says, you may cut off my leg, I may die, whatever it is, they're gonna tell you. And you gotta be informed that that might happen, however remote the possibility is gonna be. Thinking about that with helping someone who is generally outside of the systems that you're used to working in, and helping them understand what they need to know to be able to have informed consent about stepping forward to doing a program, taking out a loan, making plans for the future that involve other people and other resources. All of that is setting expectations.
Mm-hmm. Nancy, I understand, CARCD has some concrete examples of how you all have worked toward advancing equity, some success that you all have had. What can you tell us about those?
Yeah, when I was thinking about answering this, I really thought about partnerships. I'm kind of building off the theme that Carlos started, because I think there are a lot of different ways of partnering. Different people partnering in different ways can really help. The first example is just, one project that was done by a partnership between the Santa Cruz and Monterey RCDs, some nonprofits, and some private farming organizations to, using Department of Water Resources funding, put together like 30 Spanish language workshops about irrigation efficiency. They reached almost 500 Spanish-speaking producers and participants in those two counties, and made a real difference. And what was really important is that wasn't just that one workshop that they did. In coming out and speaking the language of the people who needed the help, they began to form these trusting partnerships, and those continue, and they continue to work together after that. don't want to just put all the credit on us for doing things. Producers themselves are creating partnerships to help themselves. Just a couple examples that we have in California are the Punjabi American Growers Group. That's a group of folks, mostly in the Central Valley, who, pool their knowledge so that folks aren't just in a void. And then we're working with them to get better ties between the RCDs in those regions and those growers. And another group is the Asian Business Institute and Resource Center. So there are a couple other examples. And then CARCD has partnered with NRCS at both the state and federal level on our Justice, Equity, and Diversity and Inclusion program, which has allowed us to provide training and resources to RCDs across the state to help them do better outreach to underserved farmers and ranchers. And that gives them then the tools to create these relationships we've been talking about. And then we're also lucky that NRCS in California hosts the Black Farmers Conference and the Latino Farmers Conference every year. And CRCD is happy to be partnering with them on what's going to be the first Asian Farmers Conference, which these are really great. People come and you go and you're like, oh, they didn't know we existed, and now they do, and they learn about the programs. And then also CRCD works with the Intertribal Agricultural Council and NRCS's tribal liaison professionals to improve our ability and that of the RCDs to create effective partnerships with tribes.
I want to stick with you, Nancy, and then work the way back toward me on this next question. But we've talked a lot about changes on kind of the system side of things to work with the producer. But are there reasonable requests of the producer in their interaction with the system as part of this as well to get them, up to speed? We've got a lot of producers that are working regularly with NRCS programs, very familiar with the process. But for these folks that aren't as familiar, what are things that you think, again, are those reasonable requests of the producer to get them to kind of expedite the process of achieving equity, getting conservation on the ground, getting that process going?
Well, I think maybe it would be getting back to this idea of if you learn about it from NRCS and you understand it, tell your friend down the road and bring them to the next meeting. And then that way we can build out this network of people from all different backgrounds who are in on the system. I think that would be the only ask. I think I don't want to be asking a lot of people who've been asked to do a lot of stuff for free for way too long.
Mm-hmm. Gary, your thoughts?
Well, trying to help people interact with something that no one likes to go borrow money. I mean, that's our problem, right? I mean, you have a need, and talking about financial situation for most people is, I don't know if it's root canal or some other unpleasant medical procedure that most people think about, but helping people get over that. And I know I'm talking not at a detailed program level of the things, but this is kind of the message that Farm Credit is trying to help our partners as we do outreach, like the Intertribal Ag Council or the National Black Growers Council. If there's a field day, for instance, that the National Black Growers Council does, to be able to have casual interactions with the people who will be the potential sources of help, just sort of lowers that reserve factor of, I don't really want to tell anybody what's in my wallet or the things that Farm Credit would need to know in that particular slice of relationship, because the relationship that the producer has isn't just Farm Credit or just the local conservation district. It's a whole landscape of relationships that is part of the social factor that they need to understand of how they interact with all that, especially if they haven't before. So something like a field day where you have a whole bunch of, did we talk about partnerships here? I think we did. Have a whole bunch of partners there in the day. It's pretty low impact. Think of the ways that you can accomplish that kind of interaction with people that farm credit, other providers that need to be in that landscape of network that those producers need. And it's not, you need them today, so you're going to talk to a loan officer. It's more like, oh yeah, that guy over there is a loan officer, and you might want to go have a casual conversation with him.
Very good. Seanicaa, your thoughts?
My thoughts would be in conversations with producers is ask the hard questions. Producers have questions. Sometimes they don't want to ask them, but I encourage them to ask the hard questions because this is your livelihood. As Gary just mentioned, even when engaging with Gary or someone in Gary's capacity, if you're not comfortable with something, if you don't understand something, use your voice and ask those questions. And then also, I would say, once you've asked those questions, take time to think about it. There's not a rush. Equity in and of itself is about meeting the needs and meeting people where they are. But if you're not willing to use your voice and say what it is that you need or vocalize where you are, it's harder for us to get the help that you need to you.
Very good. Jeanette?
So yesterday, Farmer Veteran Coalition celebrated our 15th anniversary, and we've built partnerships. Thank you. It's a small milestone. We built partnerships all this way with all the different departments of USDA, but especially with NRCS. And they're really thinking outside of the box right now. We have 2 agreements that I wanted to talk about real quick. The one is with the state conservationists from Louisiana, where I've hired a person, they're on my payroll, but 75% of the time they work for NRCS and 25% they act as a regional coordinator for Farmer Veteran Coalition. Their sole job is twofold. One, to help NRCS hire some underserved populations, specifically veterans. So they're recruiting on the basis as people are going through the TAPS program and exiting out of the service. Second of all, they actually go and meet with veterans and go through the process I identified earlier as talking about, what's your plan? What program do you do first, second, third? How do we apply for that and get the capital to do that and help you grow a farm from scratch? We've just started it. It's been very successful. He's one of 10 regional managers, so I need 9 other state conservationists to reach out to me so we can put the rest of them into play. And the other is Chief Crosby has reached out to us when there's specific problems in specific areas. Montana, for example, we are signing an agreement now that Montana's different. There's states that are different. They're frontier, not rural. Then you look at the population per square mile, it's drastically different. Montana, Wyoming, and a few other states up there have very high suicide rates. So any program that you do up there, you have to incorporate behavioral and mental health components into it. And conservation practices are different in the trains that are up there. And the classes that we're doing are going to institute programs for a community. So it's actually going to be part of the training is doing a program for the community. So we're hoping to use that as a pilot as we roll it out throughout the rest of our chapters in the rest of the states. But I think they've put their money where the mouth is, and they've signed these agreements, and they're taking action to do what's needed to be done to make sure that they are addressing equity and they're providing services to the underserved. Because our population, it's not just veterans. You need to realize that our population is very diverse because it mirrors the military, which is very diverse. So we have, disabled women, every minority group. We have it all. So the help has been very much appreciated by our membership, which is growing by about 100 members a week. So we're at 47,000 members across the country now.
Very good. Dr. Goldman, before I wrap things up with the panel, I do want to ask you a question, and maybe if you can walk the audience through the work of USDA's Equity Commission, which I know has been such a critical part of the Biden administration's Department of Agriculture. What can you tell us about the Equity Commission's work as it relates to conservation, as it relates to natural resource conservation, and those efforts?
Doggone it, Spencer. I was really looking forward to getting that, but let me.
Well, we can answer that too.
Let me answer.
If we can be concise. The lid's on it.
All right, because I'm guilty because I wanted to come back to this thing around heirs property, and I want to address that question too, and I will get to the Equity Commission, and I'll be brief. But as we start talking about what we're trying to do here, it's kind of demystifying this whole thing, right? And you asked about the responsibility that we have to put on our customers. In some cases, it's more of an art than a science, where you get to the point where you can go to a grower, a customer, and say, look, now the responsibility is on you. You understand the benefits associated with this. There's certain things that you have to do now to unlock, to demystify those benefits. I was talking about heirs property earlier, and I didn't explain it because it's not well understood. But let's just imagine that Jeanette and I are siblings. Stay with me. Just imagine that Jeanette and I are siblings, and our parents pass away, and they have $1 left. And there's no will, there's nothing. And so Jeanette and I inherit that $1. You take that $1, you tear it in half, you get half of it, I get half of it. Do you have 50 cents? No. You have 50% interest in $1. That's no good until you and I get together and you tape it back together, right?
Amen.
Folks, that's heirs property. And then if I pass away and I have 4 kids, then they get 1/4 of my 50-cent interest, so they have like 12.5% interest.
And it goes on.
And it goes on and on and on. And so because they didn't trust in the system, it's like, I'm not going to tell the courthouse, I'm not going to get an attorney because I don't trust in the system because they're going to take my stuff away. And then you finally you end yourself in this situation with heirs property. And now, but now you've demystified it. You have a neighbor that you know is getting a CSP payment because they have gone through and done what they needed to do to show clear ownership of that property. So now you have more incentive. Jeanette and I have more incentive to get together and put that $1 back together so we can unlock a CSP benefit on that particular acre, and it goes on and on. Back to the Equity Commission. As you all may be aware, the Equity Commission first, it was talked about in a lot of different ways. It was first kind of legislated in the American Rescue Plan, came over to the Inflation Reduction Act, and it's a panel of experts that provide recommendations to the Secretary and the Department on how we can deliver on more equitable distribution of resources and services. Next week, in D.C., they will deliver the final report to the Secretary and to the Department, and we're really excited about doing it. But they have done the work. These are people from amongst us, right? So these are farmers, ranchers, attorneys, economists, all across the board. Gary Matteson is on the Ag Subcommittee. I mean, he has a wealth of knowledge that should help USDA better develop financial programs to benefit our customers. And so we have a large resource of people that are here to bring this information forward. We're really looking forward to working with them. Here's the thing that's a little different about the Equity Commission. They're trying to get, as I said earlier, they're trying to get more customers to yes, with the understanding that if you get more of your customers to yes, particularly in a dynamic agricultural environment that we're in, if you get more people to yes, then those people start to defend those programs that they've been able to benefit from. And equity kind of takes legs of its own then, because when you get more people involved, intimately involved in the programs, in the processes, then you have this natural advocacy that makes things more sustainable. And so, yes, we are looking forward to the Equity Commission. We have the Equity Commission, we have an Agriculture Subcommittee, a Rural Community and Economic Development Subcommittee, and all of those will be in lockstep next week to deliver those final recommendations. We're pretty excited about it. Thank you.
We'll stay tuned for those recommendations. And
sure.
We are just a few minutes away from wrapping up here, so I do want us to wrap up just kind of on a lightning round basis here, looking at the folks we've got in the room, conservation leaders from across the country that have relationships, know that every acre of their conservation district, have the ability to interact with producers. 30 seconds from all of you on what can the folks in this room do to make your life easier, to make your goals easier to obtain.
Here's what I would challenge all of us to ask. As you're sitting there thinking about the district that you represent, the county, the area that you represent, think about who's at the table, but think about who else in the district is not at the table, and how do you get their perspective into the conversation about conservation. I think that's equity when you can constantly ask the question, who needs to be represented, and go figure out ways to get that representation at the table and get those issues on the agenda.
Jeanette?
First of all, I want to say thank you. There's been tremendous work done by everyone in this room and the whole organization, especially during this difficult time with climate change. So I really, the only thing I would suggest is if there is a declination involved with someone, to explain the reason why to them clearly, and maybe perhaps what they can do to overcome that and reapply again. That makes a lot of difference. And I was a banker for 24 years. I understand what it's like to be the loan officer and have to deliver the not so good news. But I think that helps them realize that, you know, it's being looked at in that light and how they can overcome it.
Seanicaa?
I would say to everyone in the room to be intentional about cultural competence, meaning the people that you serve, in order to serve them properly and at the best level, you have to understand where they are and what they have gone through, and then tailor your approach with intentionality to meet them where they are.
Good. Very good.
Yeah, very
I'm going to turn it around from what Dr. Goldmon said. And instead of looking, not that you shouldn't do what he said, I always do what he said. But opposite from looking at who's not at the table, that's, you got to do that. But look at the folks who you know are in the network. Do you know what Farmers Union or Farm Bureau or Farm Credit are doing with respect to diversity and inclusion? If you don't know, do some homework. Go find out what other people are doing and ask them about the program that they say they're doing on their website. And so how's that working out here? And make it a topic that you can discuss rather than something that you're like, oh yeah, sorry, we don't, I really don't want to talk about that. It's kind of uncomfortable. Get over yourselves and do some homework on the people that you're supposed to be working with, that are supposed to be that are your friends, and challenge them. Challenge them with your questions.
Talking about cultural competency, I think one of the great ways we can do that is look at our own organizations and see if they are properly representing what our populations look like. And if they're not, then take a really intentional approach at recruiting and, more importantly, retaining people who represent the diverse communities in all of our states.
What a great conversation. I learned a lot. I hope all of you did too. Please join me in thanking our panelists.